Greetings and welcome to the latest edition of the Entheogenic Evolution Podcast. As always, I'm your host Martin, and I'm very happy to have you with me today. For this week's episode, my guest is Hamilton Souther from the Blue Morpho Ayahuasca Center, and this conversation actually has been a long time in the making. First of all, I was contacted by Hamilton's representative well over a year ago about having him on the podcast. We set up several different dates and issues arose and we're not able to follow through on any of those. Then Hamilton got a new assistant and was contacted by that person. And we set up this call. And now actually it's been almost 2.5 months ago is when we had this conversation. So yes, it's been a long time coming, but he's my guest here on the podcast today, talking about his own kind of spiritual awakening, his apprenticeship to ayahuasqueros in South America, his development of the Blue Morpho Ayahuasca Center, the programs that they offer there, and dietas, and all the rest of that. So I'm sure it'll be quite interesting to all of you out there in listener land. Before we get to that, just a couple quick announcements. Do want to remind everyone that the next batch of students for the Mindscape Psychedelic Institute 5-MeO-DMT Facilitator Training Program is now open for registration. This will be a 5 to 6 month long program, just like the one we are wrapping up right now. It starts on October 27th of this year, and it is designed to help people be very well informed as 5-MeO-DMT facilitators. I am a professor, teacher within the course. It is not my own course. That's run by Stephen Kirby of the Unchurched Church and the Mindscape Psychedelic Institute and his wife Amber. If you want more information about the program, I do have a direct link up at my Patreon page at patreon.com/MartinWBall. I've also recently posted it to my Facebook page. And just to be, frank, I think it's a highly affordable program, especially in comparison to some other programs that I've seen out there that actually cost 3 times as much as what Stefan is asking for this course. It is extremely comprehensive. It's very thorough. It covers everything from intake to preparation to facilitation to integration, to various therapeutic modalities and concerns and drug interactions and all kinds of stuff. It meets once a week online over the course of 5 to 6 months, then also has an in-person training. And if you want more information about the in-person training, and you're just kind of curious about it, go back a couple weeks in the podcast, and there's my account of having recently done the in-person training in Iowa with the current batch of students in that 5-MeO-DMT facilitators course. So, of course, I'm also available for 30, 60, and 90-minute calls to help you integrate your entheogenic experience. I specialize in 5-MeO-DMT, but I'm absolutely not limited to that. And also I work as sort of a mentor and sounding board for people who are facilitating and want to discuss any particular cases that they've had that have maybe been challenging or difficult, or just want some reflection on their own practices. I'm always happy to provide that. You can find more information at non-dualentheogenicintegration.com and also at my personal webpage, martinball.net. And that's it for announcements today. Next week, we'll have a couple more chapters from the Solendarian game. Still hope you're enjoying that story right there. And let's go ahead and get into the conversation with Hamilton Souther. We recorded this about 2.5 months ago, but I'm happy to bring it to you here on the podcast today. Please enjoy. Okay, I'm welcoming on to the Entheogenic Evolution podcast today, Hamilton Souther, and we've had to rearrange this interview a few different times, and actually I was originally approached by one of his staff members last year, and we had a few hit or misses there. Well, actually they were misses, but now we're hitting it. I've got Hamilton here today, and I'm excited to talk to Hamilton and about Blue Morpho. And we're just going to start by getting to know Hamilton, and let's welcome Hamilton onto the show. So it's great to have you here, Hamilton.
Hi, Martin. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Well, let me start with this, that I've seen that you've given a lot of interviews over the years, And I was just reading through the website at Blue Morpho, and it says that I think it started in 2002. Yeah, established in 2002. So you've been at this for a while. And so one of the questions that I wanted to ask you was, what keeps you interested in giving interviews?
I think the plant medicine space and the psychedelic space in particular is something that has been propagandized, and a shadow has been cast on it, even though it's been instrumental in the development of us as a species and our societies and civilization. And I feel it's really important to be an advocate for the continued expansion and legalization of plant medicines and psychedelics. It's only in the most recent history that there's been such prohibitions. And really like sharing with people a more open mindset and a more expanded view on who and what we are as a species within this beautiful earth and our role in the universe.
All right. Well, that all sounds reasonable to me. I can support that. And so now let's back up, and I'm going to start you with where I usually start with guests. And I'll just tell you right up front, I definitely have seen your name. I have seen your face. I have seen interviews with you posted. And sometimes people ask me like, well, what podcast do you listen to? What interviews do you like? And I usually answer by saying, well, I run my own podcast and then I do a bunch of other stuff. And I don't really have time to go around watching other people's interviews and stuff. Or I'm not a follower of anybody else's podcast. So even though I know your face and I know your name and I've heard of Blue Morpho, you are still new to me. So I want to take a little bit of time just to get to know you. And I'm sure you've probably told it many times before, but this is a place where I'd like to invite you to kind of share your story of how you got into this world, how you got into this role, and then we'll eventually get into Blue Morpho. But I'm really curious just to hear about you and kind of start with your own beginnings.
I got really interested in plant medicine after having an awakening in my early 20s, and I was guided to plant medicine. And at the time, I was also really interested in healing what I had witnessed as prolific and general social trauma that it looked like everybody experienced, even though it was yet to be accepted or popular to even talk about. But it was really clear to me that the Western lifestyle ended up in inevitable tragedy and traumas that people would experience. And so when I found my way to plant medicine in my early 20s, I was seeking my own personal healing and my own development. And I was also very interested in the mystical awakening that I was experiencing. And I had the real honor and luck to be guided to a teacher by the name of Julio Llerena Pinedo in the Peruvian Amazon in a very remote area. And he introduced me to the world of ayahuasca and the Amazonian mysticism, and the combination of those provided not only deep healing, which has now been corroborated by millions of people around the world, but also took me on a deep journey into traditional apprenticeship, where I was the first Westerner to be accepted into a traditional lineage, and really crossed over the bloodlines into a life, a life in the forest in my early 20s. And then that started a long journey of being instrumental in the creation of the neo-shamanic revolution and the awakening and proliferation of the understandings around the plant medicines and their importance as not only a definitive form of medicine, but also for the purposes of mystical experiences. And then that led to Blue Morpho and all the work that we've done with people from around the world over the last 20 plus years.
So backing up even a little bit further, so you've mentioned that you had an awakening experience that happened in your 20s. But where did you grow up? What part of Western society did you call home?
Yeah, I grew up in the San Jose Bay Area near San Francisco, really what's now Silicon Valley. So I grew up right in the heart of the origins of big tech, and went through your typical lifestyle there of athletics and scholastics and getting prepped for college and all of that great stuff, and went to the University of Colorado at Boulder and studied anthropology there. And then right after I graduated, found myself living in the Amazon.
Okay. So we grew up not too far from each other. I grew up mostly in Chico, in Northern California, and my dad would teach summer school at UC Santa Cruz. So I spent most of my summers in Santa Cruz, just over the hill from San Jose.
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah. I spent a lot of time in Santa Cruz. What a beautiful place.
Yeah, yeah. I never picked up surfing, though. People always ask me that. And it's like, well, did you surf? Like, no, I boogie boarded, a little body surfing. I was a junior lifeguard for many years, which spent a lot of time at the beach.
A lot of people don't know that it's a wintertime sport, surfing. And so you have to be interested in not only the cool Pacific water, but during winter. And if you're interested in any other sports that happen during winter, you have to pick one or the other.
Yeah, yeah, because that's when the waves are bigger.
Exactly.
Yeah. So your story, from what you've shared so far, is not all that unique in the sense that it's quite common for people to have some kind of experience that happens to them outside of working with plant medicine, that then the desire to either replicate that or further explore that, or it just becomes an opening for people. And then following on that experience, that they dive into the world of plant medicine and look to really get more information about what all that is. And so you've mentioned it a couple times, but I'm just curious if there's anything that you would want to share about what was that spiritual awakening for you in your 20s. Any details you'd want to share, I'm very curious of.
Yeah, I think that as I've tried to explain it over the years, it's become actually simpler to understand. It's a moment in your life when you realize in a very deep and visceral way that there's a lot more going on than what you've been exposed to or what you know. And that very fragile bubble that you have that represents your worldview and the expanse of your understanding of being alive gets ruptured very quickly, and you have experiences or you realize that there's just a lot more going on. And in my case, it represented around spiritual philosophy and mystical understandings. I think for others, maybe it's about the state of the world or geopolitics or something. But in my case, it was really a mystical thing. And that greater understanding that there was a lot more going on meant that there was also a great need to look for more explanation and teaching and ultimately guidance.
So I don't want to press you on it, but I'm still kind of curious if you might share a little bit more about just what that was for you. So I'll go first. I'll just share for me, as a teenager, a very significant event for me was the very first time that I ever experienced cannabis. And that was just a radical eye-opener for me. And I was 15 at the time. I had had some alcohol before then, decided I don't like that. I grew up in a completely secular, scientific, materialist household, no sense of religion or spirituality whatsoever of any kind. But in consuming cannabis, I really quickly decided, like, okay, everything I've been told about cannabis is absolutely a lie. And that I am now very curious about my perception of the world. What is the nature of the mind? What is the nature of the self? It blossomed into sort of a deep philosophical exploration for me, and that eventually led me into becoming a philosophy major in school. And then my dissatisfaction with being a philosophy major led me into being a religious studies minor, because I wanted to study more about Buddhist philosophy, but you can't do that in a philosophy department. And then it was my second experience with psilocybin mushrooms that I was like, maybe this is what people are talking about when they mentioned the spirit world. And I had come from a background where I was very critical of traditional religions, and I still generally am rather critical of religions. But that, for me, that's kind of what got me going. And at the same time, I had a teacher in high school, one of these cool teachers that you could talk to about anything. And the day after I graduated, I stopped by her office, and she had a book, and it was Zen Mind, Beginner Mind. She's like, "Oh, Martin, I think you'd really like this book." And so I read that, and that's what got me interested in Buddhism and Buddhist philosophy. So I'm just curious that I always like to talk to people about what are those experiences that are really a turning point for them. So you've spoken of it as a mystical awakening, a spiritual awakening. But I'm always interested in the details of, like, when did it happen? How did it come about? How did you process it at the time? If you want to share, if you just want to pass on it, that's okay too, Hamilton.
No, I'm happy to share. I mean, in my case, it was really simple. I gave my life to spirit, and in doing so, I started to have experiences that represented a kind of factual reality behind that greater concept of spirit. And I hadn't had that kind of experience before in my life. And so, like you, I didn't have a real context for that kind of an experience. But it made not only spirit, but the belief behind it and a real rational understanding of why our ancestors for hundreds of thousands of years had it in their mythology. Whatever was in their consciousness awakened in my consciousness, and I was able to relate directly to those ideas. It was no longer a concept of belief, but a kind of natural, factual aspect to physics or even science. It just all of a sudden clicked and made sense. And before that, in my life, I had just lived within a materialist bubble that didn't have an understanding for what that phenomena could represent. And all of a sudden, I found myself with my same materialist views, only now sitting behind them, a much greater understanding of what I thought of as spirit. And so that was the trigger. That was, the core trigger to the experience itself.
And where did you first learn about ayahuasca? Was it as an anthropology student, or had you heard of it before jumping into that area of study? How did that come into even your awareness that this is the thing that's out there?
Yeah, very little, actually. I met a guy in college, funny enough, who had driven a VW bus with some friends from the United States and got as far as Colombia. And when he was in Colombia, ended up in the presence of some people that had yahe, and they sat down and ended up having an experience. And he didn't have much to say on it. He only used two words to describe the experience. One was a overwhelmed, like, whoa, kind of a reaction. And the other was God. So those are the two things he said about the experience. I didn't think much more about it. And then on my way to Peru, I read a book about shamanism that mentioned ayahuasca and the writer's experience having participated in an ayahuasca ceremony. And my thoughts was that it had to have been overwritten. It just seemed so impactful and so foreign to anything that I had experienced. I thought the writer was exaggerating. And those were the only two accounts of anybody working with ayahuasca I had ever heard of before I found myself in the Amazon getting ready to drink it myself.
So what year were that? What year was that, and how old were you at that point?
Yeah, when I first heard about it, it was in 1998. And when I first read about it, then it was in 2001. And it was in 2001 that I found myself in the Amazon drinking ayahuasca for the first time.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and talk about that now and the decision to get down there. And I'd love to hear anything you'd want to share about, especially your first experience and your first entry into that world. And had you had any prior psychedelic experience before this?
Yeah, I had very mild experiences, but not many. Psychedelics were not really part of my life in any kind of way. I had experienced cannabis before and had a somewhat psychedelic experience from that, but psychedelics were not really part of my practice at that time. And finding myself in the Amazon, I was guided there is the easiest way to say it. After the time of my awakening, I would hear very clear messages of what I needed to do and where I needed to go next. And it was very prophetic, and I mostly to test the accuracy and validity of the experience as I was trying to gauge what was really happening. Took me on a course of action to follow really verbatim what I was experiencing from my journeys and meditations. And so I was really sent to the Amazon, and it was ultimately corroborated 10 years later that the teachers that I had in their ayahuasca ceremonies had been seeing me for many, many years before I came and actually arrived in person. And in that first ayahuasca ceremony, well, I jokingly say that's the first ceremony that I'm still integrating. That was the most whelming and overwhelming experience of my life up until that moment. And it showed me that what humans know is less than an atom compared to an ocean of what the universe is. And that there's just so much more going on, that there needed to be real deep study and understanding, and that this was a phenomena that the West didn't know about. The West didn't know about the phenomena of ayahuasca, and that there was something extremely unique about it and important. And so I followed the visions and the teachings and the visions themselves to stay and seek a way to be able to get training. It seemed like it was an impossibility to actually be able to master the art of ayahuasca from that first ceremony.
And that's definitely quite the leap to go from drinking it, experiencing it, to deciding, like, I really want to learn everything that there is about this. I want to seek an apprenticeship. And you've already mentioned that 10 years in, that your teachers that you ended up working with said that they had anticipated your arrival, which is, you read some anthropological accounts, and that this kind of thing does seem to happen from time to time. So it kind of fitting into that category. But at the time of just starting out, I'm curious, how did you, because it's such a different world. I mean, this is a long way from San Jose, California, to be down there in the jungle drinking ayahuasca. I would imagine that you didn't really anticipate that this is where your life is going to go, though I understand you're listening to that inner guidance and that inner wisdom, and it's just following that. But at the time, like, did you talk to your parents about it, your family? It's like, what is Hamilton doing? Or, because, these days, most people have probably heard the word ayahuasca. I mean, it shows up across media spectrum at this point, but, 24 years ago, still not really that well known of what this brew is. So how did you talk to other people in your life about this decision that, I'm going to live down here in Peru, and I'm going to be drinking this amazing brew and following this path? Or was it just, I'm here, this is what I'm doing?
I think there was the decision to have to stay and somehow make it work out. The vision that I had, the last vision of a series of about 4 hours of visions from the first ceremony, was that I would stay there and I would train there. And there was a tiny community of 9 families that lived on a very small tributary to the Ucayali River, which is one of the main 2 rivers that form the Amazon. And it was the last house on that river of permanent inhabitants. And so I was told that I was going to live in the forest where other people didn't live. And I thought it was preposterous at first. And so I asked, well, what am I supposed to do? And the message that I got was, become accepted and learn how to live here first. What I didn't know is that the exact location that I drank in that first ceremony was about 500 yards from one of the greatest mystics and healers of that area of the forest. And so I was being guided directly to my teacher, and not even knowing it at that time. So first I had to figure out how to live there. And then I had to figure out how you live in the forest. And it's way beyond the idea of being off grid. You're as far as people live, and then upriver, it's just forest. And there are no roads, there are no wide paths, there are only game trails and small footpaths. And it is the Amazon, and it's untamed wilderness. It's all primary forest, and majestic and incredible. And so first I thought it was an adventure that was, on par with other pioneers. And it was before social media had created great globalization of all this images and video from around the world. And so it was truly off the beaten path. And I thought it was fantastic to get the opportunity as an anthropologist to live the anthropology that I had been studying. And it was also extremely scary. And then in terms of how I interacted with family and friends about it, was I told them exactly what I was doing. And most were extremely concerned.
Yeah.
And thought that I would come back very quickly from the experience and hoped that I would survive. And then my actual mom and brother came down and went out to where I was starting to live to experience it and see it. I mean, they were invited to come see what I was doing, and they interacted there. And my mom had ayahuasca ceremony, and it was an opportunity for her to see why I was doing that. And then there was absolute support.
Oh, beautiful. So with this way out of the way place that you're at, so did you end up like actually staying with families, or did you, build your own home? Are you out there cutting down trees and, constructing a shelter? So kind of my asking this is currently my son, who's 11, he's really into the show Alone. He likes watching like people going out in the wilderness and like building their hut or whatever. Was it something like that, or how did that work, of like actually making a place for yourself here with these families that maybe had never even had an outsider before? I mean, it's just such a leap. It's such a big jump into the unknown, and it's such a radically different world and different environment for somebody coming from, San Jose, California.
Well, I first had to get permission to live out there. And so there was a town hall meeting, and the heads of family all came, and I had to give a speech on why I wanted to live there. And there had to be a unanimous vote to allow me, and I was allowed. And then I was gifted a piece of land that was the next homestead. And so we started with a piece of just raw Amazon and on a small river bend. And so it was very much like those shows, only without a cameraman and without anyone to help supply. But rather it was a frontiers experience with an axe and a machete and some basic tools to go out there and build a shelter. And you start with a small A-frame. Typically you start by utilizing local materials to create a small roof, and you sleep in a hammock with a mosquito net around it. And then little by little, you work the land to be able to build a homestead on it. So with the help of the locals, I was able to learn how to do that. And over the next 6 months, I built my first house and improved upon it continuously until there was an agricultural plot that produced food, had learned how to fish and hunt to be able to supplement the food that came from the agricultural plot, learned how to identify medicinal plants and collect them for the medicinal needs that we had, and learned how to identify ayahuasca and the plants that go into it, cook it with the teachers that I was learning from, and participate in those ceremonies. I was ultimately there for 4.5 years.
Wow. Well, it certainly sounds like for any wannabe anthropologist, I mean, that just sounds like a dream of getting an opportunity to do something like that and to really enter into a culture, really enter into a worldview and a new environment and a new ecology. So that must have been exciting, and certainly took you from being a potential armchair anthropologist to somebody who's really in the thick of it. Just backing up a moment, did you have any anthropologists whose work you really admired, or that was very inspirational to you?
I think all of the classic anthropologists. I really appreciated their work, and then I also appreciated the work of Joseph Campbell. But more than anything, I appreciated the understanding that there was something important to learn from the cultures, and that they had something to impart on us. It wasn't just a voyeuristic activity, but rather one to come to with great humility, that there was something to understand. And what they had a great understanding for was a kind of technology that we didn't yet relate to or have reference for. And so they understood it in a form of mythology, but they were talking about something fundamental to all people, not just the beliefs in their tribal societies. And so it was a window into an ancient understanding that had died off for the birth of the Western mind and Western civilization. And it was an opportunity to explore that in great depth.
Yeah. Did you ever read any Michael Taussig?
No, I didn't.
No. He was he's an anthropologist that I really got into for a while when I was, going through my studies as an undergraduate and then a graduate student. And one of the things that impressed me, because it never came up in my classes, my teachers never talked about the medicines. And I was reading this guy, Michael Tosek, and he's writing about, and I'm down here and I'm drinking ayahuasca and I'm doing my anthropology while drinking ayahuasca. And I just thought, like, yeah, if I'm going to be an anthropologist, that's the kind I want to be. And really interesting works that are very critical of colonialism and the relationship between the West and indigenous cultures. And anyway, I don't read any anthropology anymore these days, but way back when I was a student that I really liked his work. So I was just curious if you had come across him. Now, I'd love to talk about the apprenticeship itself. And, I've had many guests on. I've been doing this podcast since 2008. So I've had lots of people talk about their apprenticeships and where they've gone and how they've studied and what it was like. But I'm always interested, just like I kind of kept going back to your awakening experience. I'm always interested in the details of practically how did that work for people? What were those relationships like? And what was that tutelage and study, and what did it demand and require of you, especially as an outsider, someone coming from a completely different world and completely different culture? And I love the story that you just shared about having to meet in front of the local families and give a speech to justify even being there, which is really different. We can move anywhere we want in the United States, and there's no committee to say whether you can be there or not. It's just basically it comes down to you have the money to buy the property, and then you're here. So this is a very different world. And obviously, it's very different than going to university and getting a degree where we're reading books, we're studying, we're being tested. This is a very different world of knowledge and experience. So anything you'd want to share there, I'm very curious in.
Well, traditional training is ultimately the passing down of the last generation's knowledge. And in the case of ayahuasca apprenticeship in the Amazon, it's done through very little verbal training. So there's a type of framework that's given for your safety and a desire to continue. But the three main pieces of teaching that I received was to drink the ayahuasca in ceremony, to never give up, and to follow the path of divine wisdom or the path of heart. And ultimately, you learn through the visions themselves. And so it's a very different kind of education than the education that you get in front of your mind being trained by a person and information in a video or a whiteboard. It's an understanding of something deep inside you that is transformative until you have the capacities, knowledge, and awareness to be able to serve your community. And the role of a traditional medicine person or médico vegetalista in the Amazon is based entirely on the efficacy of their treatments that they provide for their fellow people. And so it's not exactly the same kind of service that you traditionally get paid for, or a kind of service that people are there just to have the experience and, try ayahuasca or something like that. But instead, people with significant illnesses come to you and they need a valid intervention in the form of something that would be akin to Western medicine. Only the difference being that the practitioner has the plants and their knowledge as the means and mechanism in which to deliver that. And so the simple defining line of whether or not you've learned and you've made it through apprenticeship is if in your presence the people around you get better. And so you have to have a very high success rate in healing the people that come to you with different kinds of ailments, which could be purely physical ailments or psychosomatic or even spiritual or mystical in their nature. And so you have to learn how to diagnose, and you have to learn how to understand from the diagnosis what treatment or what plants need to be used, the combination and doses. You need to be able to understand the safety tolerances that somebody has, utilizing very rudimentary forms of diagnostics. Or you could say incredibly sophisticated forms of diagnostics through the visions themselves. But it's sort of a more visionary, energetic interface that you have instead of like reading an MRI machine or an X-ray, et cetera. And then you go through extreme experiences, rites of passage continuously. And through those rites of passage, you have to confront your fears and learn how to ultimately address the needs of the individuals. So first it starts as addressing your own needs, and then ultimately addressing those of the others. But it looks like continuous and voluminous ayahuasca ceremonies. I would participate in training anywhere from 100 to 150 ceremonies a year. And you participate in what are called dietas, or ceremonial fasts, where you drink other medicinal plants that aren't visionary in their own right. And during the fasts, you learn from the plants themselves. So the plants are the teachers, the medico-vegetalistas, or the shamans or medicine people, are there to function as guides. And you ultimately go through continuous evolution and shifts in consciousness until you've learned the arts of their medicines and can perform them.
Was there ever a point where you were going through this and felt like, damn, I am in over my head? Or was it always just, give me more? I need more of this. I want to keep going in, or maybe a little bit of both.
I would say it's yes, and you feel like you're in over your head the whole time.
Yeah.
The whole time. You're in over your head on day one, and now it's day 200 or day 2,000 or day 10,000. You're way in over your head. And there's also a drive to keep going. I think there are these miraculous experiences that are intoxicating in their own right, in terms of the deep connection that you feel with the universe and the wisdom and understanding that you're awakening to, that if you really embody the role, is something that you just can't give up on. And so while you're constantly scared and you're constantly pushed beyond your comfort zone, you're also rewarded the whole time by these experiences that you just can't have otherwise. They're not a routine kind of experience. It's night after night having experiences that others would consider to be top 5 or top 10 experiences of their lives. And for you, it's now becoming a commonplace kind of experience that's always expansive and impactful. So I think when you get used to that, then it makes you want to continue, even though you're being pushed beyond your limits.
Yeah. And then with this kind of being pushed beyond limits, that I'm imagining that this initiatory period that you're going through is, in some respects, it's missing this element that everybody wants to emphasize today, this idea of, well, you got to take time to integrate, and then you got to space out your medicine sessions. But usually when I talk to people who have gone through an apprenticeship, it's actually, no, it's drink more, keep going, drink more, keep going, drink more. And that's a large part of how these traditions are passed on. And what today is being touted as integration is not necessarily a part of the traditional cultures, which is not to say that they're missing something. It's just to say that it's embedded within their world in a very different way. Whereas if somebody is coming from outside, it's a brand new novel experience, then maybe this idea of integration has a lot of weight. But for people who are living and breathing this within, from the time that they're born all the way through, and it's been carried on for many generations, that this Western notion of integration is somewhat of a foreign concept. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on that, or anything that you'd want to share.
I think you start with an idea of purpose. And the rationale behind the continuous exposure to the medicines is for the purpose of training and filtering out people that can't take it. So that's part of the mechanism, and it's not about integrating, it's about breaking you. Yeah. And for those that break, they can integrate the rest of their lives. And no different than somebody going through Navy SEAL and they go and ring the bell and they don't make it. Well, they can go integrate that experience for the rest of their lives. That's kind of how it's thought of. And you're going to be integrated back into a tribal society, which is a very simplistic form of societal organization compared to a Western developed society. When you think of an individual having a psychedelic or plant medicine experience for the purpose of healing, or for the purpose of some kind of intervention, the goal is to reintegrate them back into their society in an improved way. And so if you really want to look at the nature of the improvement, the visionary experience can be a pattern disrupt, and there can be tremendous transformation that takes place during the experience itself. But now you're going to go back into a life that doesn't include the nature of that experience on a regular basis. And so you're looking to integrate, but you're also looking to implement what you've learned from that experience or the opportunity that it's given you to make change. And that's something that needs a certain amount of guidance, because the experience in the West is a habitual form of ritual that people do on a daily basis. So if somebody's depressed or somebody has other kinds of issues, they develop a whole ritualistic, habitual lifestyle to that, including when they go to bed and when they wake up, how they do a morning, an afternoon, and an evening, who they talk to and who's in their sphere of influence, how they relate psychologically and emotionally to their experiences. And all of those patterns have to change. And in the plant medicine experience, there's a brief window of neuroplasticity and neurogenesis that can be utilized to plant the seeds of that transformation, but then it needs to be guided. And often the opportunity to create change is deep and vast in an individual's experience, but the ability to implement that change or integrate that change is very difficult. And so you see a lot of people get a burst of creativity, a burst of overall well-being, and then little by little slip back into the patterns that they had before. And so I think that's where integration comes in, and integration coaching and guiding is not from a perspective of, I need to integrate because I had such a strong, impactful psychedelic experience, but rather I'm given a window of time to change my life. And I want a coach, and I want someone who will support me and hold me accountable to making those changes, so that somebody can ground and anchor them during that period of time, which could be 2 to 6 weeks of acute intervention. And then after that, an ongoing process. And that could also include other psychedelic events, as a year or two goes on into someone's transformation. So I just think the purpose that sits behind it is so different that you can't really compare one culture to another. And, for the person who makes it through training, they graduate to a médico vegetalista, to a maestro or a maestra. And when that happens, then they get to embrace that as a complete shift in identity, a shift in role, and a shift in lifestyle. And I think somebody coming to a normal psychedelic experience for a kind of personal intervention isn't doing that. They're looking to go back into their previous life, make changes, and have that be a kind of improvement upon their experience.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate the distinctions that you shared right there. Something that's just coming up to my mind that I also wanted to ask you about, since you have had this traditional apprenticeship, something that comes up sometimes when people are doing an apprenticeship in another culture or study another culture is sometimes you do expose various levels of rivalry or competition that might be present within the culture. So for example, I've spoken with other people who have gone down to the Amazon and find that they've apprenticed to one teacher, and then there's jealousies with another teacher, and that there are times where teachers might intentionally hold a student back for various reasons. I myself did my field work for my PhD at the Mescalero Apache Reservation, and definitely found that there were different camps, and different people had different views, and sometimes people had views about, well, that person's not really a medicine person, this person really is a medicine person. And those identifications were different depending on who you talk to at times. So I'm curious if you yourself experienced anything like that. And then I do want to ask you about sort of this, what you just mentioned about when you essentially graduate, that you are now legitimately able to take on this title, to take on this role, and that it becomes a new, like, to put it into anthropological language, we go through these performative rituals that change our social status, and that we're able to rightfully claim a title as, I am now a maestro, I am a shaman, I am a healer. So that's kind of a collection of questions and topics. But first, return to, did you find there were various levels of competition or disagreement over who was quote unquote legitimate or not legitimate within, it sounds like a rather small context in which you were going through your training?
I think that there's competition everywhere. And where I trained, it was taboo to train a foreigner. So it wasn't even just not allowed, it was taboo. It was breaking a deep cultural norm to allow anybody outside of the bloodlines in. And there was great opposition to the decisions that my teacher did for inviting me in. And so, yes, you find amongst the tribes that they're warring tribes. Many of them are not peaceful tribes. And within that, there's a desire to not only perpetuate the nature of that war, but also get into that kind of spiteful behavior of one group isolating another and describing, one group as being more valid than another or less valid or a better practitioner or not. My personal take on all of that was that all of those types of behaviors was contradictory to what I considered to be the heightened state of awareness and knowledge that was accessible through the plants itself.
Yeah.
And it brought up a great question, which I've perpetuated in my understanding, which is if the plants by themselves or if the psychedelics by themselves were the answer, then we would have had the answer tens of thousands of years ago, because we had the plants tens of thousands of years ago. So clearly by themselves and only by themselves, they don't create a great utopia for humans and civilization, but rather they perpetuate the nature of the deep subconscious to unconscious qualities that are found within us. And so, yes, I've ran into a tremendous amount of what I would think of as, petty, jealous type of behavior. And ultimately that along everything else has to be transcended. And I considered it to be a great evolution in the use of the plants and the evolution of the practitioners to finally reach a state of consciousness that could see beyond the nature of those comparisons and just let everybody do what they're doing and really hope that everybody can improve what they're doing to offer a better service and offer ultimately a better opportunity for everyone who's participating to improve. So I thought that really was the spirit of the medicine, was to support people in having a better life through these experiences, not a pecking order contest over who's more or less of a medicine person. Mm. And in terms of the titling, I simply always held to the understanding that the titles are meaningless unless you give them meaning through the nature of the behavior that you demonstrate and your capacities. So I like to affectionately say that anybody who picks up a sage wand and burns it, and anybody who grabs a rattle and shakes it is a shaman. And now you have to ask yourself, what level of shaman are you? And what quality of shaman are you? And how much do you really know? And there are people out there who are real masters, and they've spent decades studying, and they come from ancestral lineages that have passed down vast amounts of knowledge. So not only do they get the knowledge that they amass on their own during their training in the course of their life, they also get the benefit of having access to generation after generation of knowledge inside consciousness itself. Very much like the way we now get access to the internet. These civilizations and these people and lineages figured out how to store knowledge within consciousness, which is a technology the West does not yet have. And so they get that, and they really are true masters, and they deserve the title. And the others who are fronting sadly give up the title through the fact that they don't demonstrate the quality of the behavior necessary to have it. And I was given the title Maestro very young, and by my own teachers. And it ultimately was something that had to be defended for a long time, because it was unheard of that there was a foreigner with the title. And it was also unheard of that somebody that young would have the title. So in my case, it was a contested thing for a long time. And ultimately, I accepted it as a fact simply because that was the nature of my training and the job that I did. But again, I don't think the title means much unless you back it up with your actions and your capacities.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing all that. Many cultures, and it sounds like this is true for the area that you were in, just from what you've described so far in reference to these titles, is that in many indigenous cultures, there are distinctions that are made between this is a healer who works with plants and gives you plant medicines. This is the healer or the person who works with the visionary plant medicine. So that can be a completely different category. Here's someone who treats physical illness. Here's someone who treats spiritual illness. Here's someone who treats another category of illness. And sometimes, from people from outside, they just use the term shaman to kind of collectively refer to all of these kinds of figures within traditional cultures. But with the cultures themselves, they might have very specific terminology that they use in reference to these different categories, because they're just in the same way that in the West, we could say, well, there's a psychiatrist, there's a psychologist, there's a therapist, there's a physical therapist, there's the herbalist, right? That we have different categories of quote unquote healers within the West. And the same is true within a lot of indigenous cultures. And it sounds like this was also the case in the area that you were working in, just from what you've described.
It's identical. They all go by specialized names and terminology, and within them, there's ranks of proficiency. And so you have your ayahuasquero who specializes in ayahuasca, your palero who specializes in trees, your tabaquero who specializes in tobaccos. You have an espiritista who specializes in just pure spirit. You'll have people who specialize in, like you said, the visionary plants versus non-visionary plants. And so all of that is identical. And then from there are the ones that are considered more proficient and less proficient. And the masters are given the title maestro. And then they'll say maestro of, es maestro de ayahuasca, es maestro de los palos, es maestro sananguero. So they'll utilize the nature of the title. Shaman is not a word that's used in the Amazon outside of the Western influence of it.
Right.
So Westerners brought the title to the Amazon. And the best, I think, translation is from Spanish, médico vegetalista, which means doctor of plants or doctor of vegetation.
Yeah. So how long was your training before this title was granted to you by your teachers?
Yeah, first I trained in 5 disciplines. So I trained in ayahuasca, the trees, sanango, tobacco, and toé. Those are 5 different kinds of visionary plants. And those were the ones that I was given the title in to differentiate from the myriad of other kinds of practitioners. And in those 5 titles, I was given the title maestro at the end of 2004.
Okay. Toy, it's an interesting one. I think a lot of people who are drinking ayahuasca usually are drinking ayahuasca that doesn't contain toé, though sometimes it is included as an ingredient. I'm just curious if there's anything you'd want to share around toé. So this is in the Datura brugmansia family, which also is notorious for potentially being toxic at too high of a dose. But it's a very important plant in the Amazon. It is often included within ayahuasca, and it can be kind of scary for people. It's a different one. So I'm just curious of what you'd be interested in sharing with that.
Yeah, I would consider it a very advanced visionary plant and one that novices should not participate with. Mixed with ayahuasca, it can intensify the ayahuasca exponentially, and it can make it last much longer in terms of its duration. It's potentially fatal, and so you have to really know how to work with it and use it. And it's not just potentially fatal from an overdose, it's also potentially fatal from other reasons. It's incredibly dissociative, and I don't think that that's really healthy for most Westerners who are already experiencing some mild form of dissociative disorder or pathology to begin with. It's a plant that is typical for inducing very dark and intense visions, and so it can take people through deep fear and terror, and in larger doses can last for multiple days at a time. So the longest single toé experience I've ever witnessed was over 5 days. That a person was in a 100% visionary and altered state, seeing things in 3, 4D reality that other people were not seeing or perceiving. And so I think you have to be very careful with it. I would not recommend it again for novices. I was glad that I trained in it, but it took me over 20 years to integrate it.
Yeah, yeah. It's definitely one that I have never sought to have any kind of experience with. Back in just when I was out of high school, I had a friend who went and smoked some datura leaves because it's fairly common in California, and especially down in Southern California. It's all over the place. And he smoked it, and he said that everybody was like, it was like a cartoon, and everybody was walking backwards. And then he went into a public restroom, and he said the door closed. And when the door closed, he lost his vision, and that he was in the public restroom for 8 hours until somebody came by and opened the door, and suddenly he found he could see again. It's like, okay, that's something I'm not interested in at all.
Yeah, and that's just from smoking it, and probably not too much of it. The dose is it's very potent. So I've heard of many similar experiences associated with it. It is a common garden plant. And I think the best ways to work with it is have it in your garden. It's considered a great protector. It's considered a great plant to have growing near you. And I really like the idea of the dream specialists who take a leaf of it or take the flower of it and they put it under their pillow. And so instead of ingesting it, they just, by having it close to them when they sleep, they are able to tap into it. So I recommend people utilize it in that way. Find a leaf, ask for permission to harvest it, put it under your pillow, but don't ingest it.
Yeah. Yeah. And beautiful flowers, undoubtedly, astoundingly, very beautiful flowers. Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation, Hamilton, and I appreciate you allowing me to kind of keep digging around some of these different topics. I did want to keep you to somewhat around an hour, and we're coming up on that. So let's just go ahead and let's talk about Blue Morpho and the founding of Blue Morpho. And this is now where people can come to receive ayahuasca and do this work. And I also noticed on the website that San Pedro is mentioned as well. But let's just dive into that for a few minutes, and then I'll let you go.
Awesome. Thank you. Blue Morpho has been a pride and joy. I started Blue Morpho in 2002, and we're one of the first centers to offer dedicated Amazonian plant medicine for people from around the world. We've specialized in ayahuasca and tree dietas here in the Amazon. And once or twice a year, we'll also host Sanango Dieta. And then in the Andes, we'll work with San Pedro and ayahuasca. So in both locations, we hold retreats. It's incredible to go to the Sacred Valley outside of Cusco. It's a bucket list experience to go see the remnants of the Incan Empire and go to Machu Picchu and things like that, and to connect it with a deep plant medicine experience is also very profound. So we hold about 12 to 15 retreats a year. They're small group retreats. I lead them, and you get to have the experience of our ayahuasca and or our San Pedro. And it's a deep dive. It really is an opportunity to connect with ancient wisdom, the depth of the plant medicines, learn how to learn directly from them, experience personal transformation and healing, and if you're lucky, a deep mystical awakening.
Yeah, and if you could tell us just a little bit about what is meant by dietas. Now, I know that much of my audience knows what this is, and I've had people on talking about it before and describing the process of going through the different dietas. But sometimes people are just thinking of the dieta as, these are the things I'm not supposed to eat or drink before having an ayahuasca experience. But you mentioned the dietas with the trees, and I know that that's a completely different branch of what the dietas are about. So if you could explain a little bit of that and how participants are getting involved with that level of work.
The best way to understand dieta is that there's an ancient technology that our ancestors learned to be able to pass the essence or the spirit of another plant into your body. Very much like how we learned how to download software into a phone. So as a metaphor, we could say you're going to download the essence of this plant into you, and it's going to live within you, and you're going to know it, and you're going to receive the benefits of having this essence be in you. And it's one of the transformative mechanisms to be able to learn the plant medicines in the forest. And so during that period of time, you eat a very restricted diet and you restrict certain activities. Like you abstain from sexual activity, you abstain from certain foods that you don't eat, like salts and oils and hot chilies. And you eat a very rudimentary diet while you drink the plants. And it can last anywhere from traditionally 6 to 8 days is the shortest. And some people in some cultures do months to up to a year that I've heard about. But we found that anywhere from 6 to 14, 15 days is enough for this mystical process to take place where the plant essence is really brought into the body and it is assimilated into the body and you start to gain the benefits from the plant. And then it said that the plant teaches you from the inside out. So once the plant is seated inside you, then it can start to share with you its wisdom and transformative qualities. So it can help people become more courageous, clearer, more centered, more grounded, more aware, get over certain fears, make better choices, better health decisions, lifestyle choices, et cetera. It's helped lots of people move past depression and trauma, PTSD, and addictions. So it's this ancient technology that really helps people unite with these other beings that we think of as plants and trees. And so at Blue Morpho, we offer that process for people to come to our lodge and experience dieta in a traditional way and receive the benefits from building those lasting relationships with the trees.
I'm curious, what would be the portion of people who are coming for ayahuasca, San Pedro, dieta? Are people often doing all of these things, or do you get people who are specifically just coming to do these dietas with the trees?
All. We have people who come specifically for dieta. Typically, they have to, been enculturated to even know about it. It's kind of one of right now the least known things. There's been so much hype about the visionary plants and the experiences people have. I think because of how impactful it is on their ego, that's been the thing that's most easy to talk about and convince others to try. But in the case of the dieta, it's a very profound experience, and the depth of it is hard to relate in words. And so people come for that once they know it exists and they understand how important it is to their lives. And so we get people who come to do that. We also hold ayahuasca, San Pedro retreats combined, and people will come and also do dieta during those retreats. So we do offer an opportunity for people to get all three of the experiences during a 1 to 2 week stay with us.
Great. So Blue Morpho has been around for a while now. So founded in 2002. These days, everybody's like, I want to open a retreat center. I'm moving to Costa Rica. I want to make this available. There's a lot of people kind of moving into the retreat space. A lot of people wanting to, very new to plant medicines and psychedelic healing are kind of jumping into this. As someone who's been in this field for over 2 decades, what are some of the biggest shifts you've seen around not only retreat centers, but people who are coming for retreats? Have you seen any large changes in the demographics of who's coming, what they're coming for, what they're getting out of retreats? Anything you'd want to share on that?
Yeah, I think for people who are interested in the retreat business and the desire to help others through that kind of experience, I would just share the advice to do it in a place that's legal. We see lots of them start in places that's illegal. It's going to become a contested issue, and it's already starting to, rustle feathers in different places. So please do it in a place that's legal. Please respect the cultures of the people where you're going to do this. Be very careful around the commoditization of the plants. It is not the way the traditional medicine is practiced. So the Western idea of people getting together to just have these experiences is not the way the traditional medicine's practiced. It's practiced in a sacred ceremony where people who are trained over decades hold that space for others. And so please seek to recreate that and provide space for that opportunity. Be aware that there's a tremendous amount of charlatanism in the space, and be careful of that. There's a growing concern around people overutilizing the term shaman and overprofessing the nature of their capacities in and around the use of visionary plants. And then otherwise, it'll be great for humanity to have a more expanded understanding and use of the plants as part of the psychedelic renaissance. In terms of demographics and people, I think the biggest change is that it's becoming mainstream. Mm-hmm. And as it becomes mainstream, people from all different echelons of society become interested. And so that leads to a diversification of services and opportunities. So find the one that most suits you. I've always recommended people find a place that they really resonate with. First, do the research to know if the place is reputable. Understand that every place that's been around for a long time will have many positive reviews and some negative reviews. That's the nature of people giving reviews. Yeah. So look at that and see if you resonate with the people that are having positive experiences. Because if you do, you have a heightened possibility of having a positive experience yourself. So look for places that have, positive reputation over years of service, and that have an energy and a vibe about them that you like, because as this expands, there will be lots of different flavors of what this is out in the world. There will go from the fully indigenous all the way to the one-off clinician experience. There will be those that are very spiritual in their context, others that are completely psychological in their context. There will be ones that are really dedicated to a collective, more ritualistic experience. There will be others that are more secular in their nature. So just see the ones that I think you would most resonate with and embrace that experience.
All right. Well, thank you for those words of wisdom, Hamilton. Really appreciate that. So just one last thing would be, what's next for you? Is it more of the same, of continuing on with Blue Morpho, or are you looking into different areas, different adventures? What's coming for you at this point, or looking forward to?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Blue Morpho continues to grow and expand, and I'm really interested in the intersection of the psychedelic renaissance and art, music, and creativity. And so I think what you can expect from me and from us coming forward is a real expansion into the art and music space. And I look forward to sharing the beauty of the plant medicines and all the different arts that come around it, what are also known as the shamanic arts, but in that vein. And so I look forward to that, and I'm interested in sharing the tools that we have with people so that they can better do this on their own. So we're teaching people how to do this safely. We have an academy called Blue Morpho Academy. You can go to it at bluemorphoacademy.com. You can become a trained sitter, coach, facilitator, or master facilitator. We have a mystery school. You can become a part of that and learn how we practice with plant medicines and sacraments in a safe and repeatable way. So you can learn the techniques that you need to know so that you can make this part of your life. And then also to have access to tools such as Icaros and recordings and playlists and intentions and invocations and just everything that you would learn in a traditional apprenticeship, so that you can actually have those at your availability to bring that into your plant medicine experiences and really increase the validity of it and improve not only your life, but those you share it with.
Oh, well, that sounds like some great tools. So just to make some online distinctions, we have bluemorphotours.com, and that's for access to the retreats. And this other website you said was Blue Morpho Academy, was that correct?
Academy.com, yeah.
Okay. And if people want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Best way is through Instagram or Facebook. And you can find me at Hamilton Souther at Hamilton Souther Official.
All right. Anything that I didn't ask you about that you want to share before I wrap it up for us today?
I guess I'd just say that we're on the dawn of a great psychedelic renaissance, and that what makes this different than any other time in history is the nature of where we are as a global culture. And I think that it's both positive and potentially negative. And so it's up to us to make it a positive. And so I just think if you really appreciate the nature of the plants and the visionary experience, to always treat it and hold it in a respectful and responsible way, and put safety first for everybody involved. And let's work together to make this a really important renaissance on a global level, and do something that is individually, purposefully impactful, and also collectively.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Hamilton. I'm really glad that we were finally able to make this happen. Really enjoyed getting to ask you these questions and hear your responses today, and share your experience and your process of going from a kid from San Jose to maestro, Blue Morpho, and all the work that you've done and what you are continuing to share and provide these resources and tools for others. It's great. It's been great getting to know you a bit here today. So thank you very much for your time, and really enjoyed the conversation.
I appreciate it, Martin. Thanks so much.